Imagine it's March 2014. The world wakes up to something that wasn't supposed to be possible anymore. Soldiers in unmarked green uniforms, no insignia, no flags, no identification, have quietly seized government buildings, airports, and strategic positions across the Crimean Peninsula in southern Ukraine. They move with precision, they move with discipline, and they say absolutely nothing. Within days, a territory the size of Maryland has changed hands without a single declared war. The West scrambles for answers. Who ordered this? How did it happen so fast? And more chillingly, who exactly are these men? They became known as the Little Green Men. And behind them, as the world would confirm, stood one man. A former KGB intelligence officer who had spent his entire adult life studying how power worked and how to take it. His name was Vladimir Putin. And America, whether it fully admitted it or not, had never been more unsettled. To understand why Russia still commands such deep strategic fear in Washington, we have to go back further. Back to a moment that Putin himself once called the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. December 1991. The Soviet Union collapses. 15 republics break away. The red flag over the Kremlin is lowered for the last time. For many in the West, this was a triumph. The end of a 50-year ideological war, the dawn of a new world order. But inside Russia, the mood was something far darker. Economic chaos, hyperinflation, organized crime filling the vacuum left by the state. A military superpower had been reduced almost overnight to a country where pensioners sold their furniture on sidewalks just to survive. For a young intelligence officer named Vladimir Putin, stationed in East Germany when the wall fell, watching crowds tear down the symbols of Soviet power while Moscow gave no orders and sent no help. This moment was not liberation, it was humiliation. And humiliation, as any psychologist or strategist will tell you, is one of the most dangerous fuels in human nature. Putin returned to Russia and eventually entered politics in St. Petersburg before being brought to Moscow, where he rose with stunning speed through the Yeltsin administration. In 1998, he was appointed director of the FSB, the successor to the KGB. In August 1999, Boris Yeltsin named him acting prime minister. And on New Year's Eve 1999, in one of the most dramatic political handoffs of the modern era, a visibly frail Yeltsin appeared on national television and resigned, handing the presidency to a man most of the world had barely heard of. Think about that for a moment. What do you think was going through Western intelligence agencies' minds the morning they read that briefing? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because the answer might surprise you. Initially, some in Washington were cautiously optimistic. Putin spoke about cooperation. He was the first foreign leader to call President George W. Bush after the September 11th attacks, offering sympathy and intelligence support. There was a brief, tantalizing window where a different kind of Russia seemed possible. But that window didn't stay open long. What intelligence analysts began noticing was a systematic pattern. Independent media outlets in Russia were being brought under state control. Oligarchs who challenged Putin politically found themselves facing prosecution or exile. Regional governors who had been elected were now appointed by Moscow. One by one, the levers of power were being pulled back to the center. And the center was one man. From Washington's perspective, this wasn't simply a domestic Russian story. It was a signal about how this new Russia understood power, not as something to be shared or checked, but as something to be concentrated and projected. The Second Chechen War, which Putin used to consolidate his political standing early in his tenure, showed the military's willingness to apply overwhelming force when the Kremlin felt its territorial integrity was threatened. What it also showed to those watching closely was a government with virtually no independent judicial, media, or legislative check on its use of that force. Then came 2007, the Munich Security Conference. Putin stood before an audience of Western leaders and delivered a speech that sent shockwaves through the diplomatic world. He accused the United States of overstepping its boundaries, of destabilizing the world through unilateral military action, and, most pointedly, of treating NATO expansion as if Russian concerns simply didn't exist. It was the clearest articulation yet of a worldview that saw American dominance not as global leadership, but as a direct threat to Russian sovereignty and dignity. NATO expansion is one of those issues that historians and policymakers still debate fiercely. Russia insists that Western leaders made informal assurances in the early 1990s that NATO would not expand eastward. Western governments dispute that any binding commitments were ever made. What is not disputed is this. As former Soviet states like Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and the Baltic nations joined NATO through the late 1990s and 2000s, Moscow's sense of strategic encirclement grew with each new member. Whether you sympathize with that perspective or not, understanding it is essential to understanding every decision Putin made afterward. And here is where the story accelerates dramatically. If you're finding this analysis valuable, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel bring you more content like this. The 2008 war in Georgia lasted 5 days. Russia recognized 2 breakaway regions, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, over furious Western objections. The message was unmistakable. Moscow was drawing its own red lines. The world had just seen a preview, and most of the world didn't fully appreciate it yet. Meanwhile, something else was happening, something largely invisible to the public. Russia was quietly revolutionizing its approach to modern warfare. After the military's embarrassingly poor performance in the First Chechen War, a systematic modernization effort had been underway for years. New precision weapons, upgraded nuclear delivery systems. But more significantly, a doctrine that Western analysts would come to call hybrid warfare. The blending of conventional military force with cyber attacks, disinformation, political subversion, and covert operations into a single, seamless strategic instrument. Cybersecurity experts began noticing Russian fingerprints on a growing number of intrusions into Western government and military networks through the 2000s. The 2007 cyber attacks on Estonia, a NATO member, following a dispute over a Soviet-era war memorial, were widely attributed to Russian actors, though Moscow denied involvement. For American intelligence officials, these weren't isolated incidents. They were a doctrine being tested in real time. Then came 2016, and the ground shifted again. American intelligence agencies, the CIA, FBI, and NSA, jointly concluded that Russia had conducted an active influence operation targeting the U.S. presidential election. The alleged methods included hacking political organizations, weaponizing social media platforms, and deploying a sophisticated disinformation architecture designed not necessarily to elect a specific candidate, but to deepen division, erode trust, and undermine American confidence in democracy itself. Russia denied involvement. The allegations remain intensely contested in their scope and ultimate impact. But the conclusion that some form of interference occurred was reached by the entire U.S. intelligence community, and later reinforced by a bipartisan Senate investigation. What do you think? Was the American response to those allegations strong enough? Leave your thoughts below, because this is exactly the kind of debate that shapes how democracies defend themselves. And then Ukraine, again. But this time on an entirely different scale. February 2022. Russia launched a full-scale invasion, the largest land war in Europe since World War II. Cities bombed, millions displaced. The global order visibly fracturing along fault lines that had been forming for 30 years. For American policymakers, the invasion crystallized something they had long debated, that Russia under Putin was not a status quo power seeking stability, but a revisionist power willing to use overwhelming military force to reshape European borders by violence. NATO unity, which many had questioned, suddenly snapped back with striking cohesion. Finland and Sweden, neutral for decades, applied for membership. The alliance that Russia had long demanded stop expanding was, as a direct consequence of Russian action, expanding faster than at any point in its history. And through it all, the nuclear dimension never disappears. Russia maintains the world's largest nuclear arsenal. Its doctrine explicitly reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in response to existential threats. Putin has periodically referenced Russia's nuclear capabilities during moments of escalating tension in ways that Western leaders cannot simply ignore. That reality alone ensures that no American president, no matter how confrontational or how conciliatory, can ever fully discount the weight Russia carries on the global stage. This is the core of the fear, and it is not irrational. It is the product of decades of evidence, documented decisions, verified capabilities, and a pattern of behavior that has consistently defied Western predictions. Russia is not the Soviet Union. It does not command a global ideological movement. Its economy is smaller than Italy's, but it has nuclear parity with the United States. It has demonstrated cyber capabilities that can reach inside the most sensitive Western institutions. It has shown a willingness to use military force across international borders. And it is led by a man forged in the intelligence world, who has spent his entire career studying how great powers rise, fall, and endure. That combination, capability, willingness, and strategic sophistication, is precisely why America still watches Russia so carefully. If this documentary made you think differently about the Russia-America relationship, subscribe to the channel. There is so much more of this story left to tell, and the next chapter may already be unfolding.